Hi everyone and welcome back. I hope you guys had a good time with the postcards and learning Illustrator. Today we're moving on to the book project and learning InDesign. Now, since we've already learned Illustrator and a little Photoshop, we're going to move pretty quickly through the basic setup of InDesign since most of the interface and shortcuts are the same across Adobe software. I hope you guys have gotten pretty comfortable with Illustrator at this point, so InDesign will be less of a challenge to learn. My final note before we jump in, I hope you guys can tell, but I'm using a real mic now. I hope the audio sounds a lot better and that'll make these videos a little bit more comfortable to watch. So instead of hopping directly into InDesign, we're going to talk a little bit about my and your favorite topic, digital hygiene. Go ahead and open up that Finder window. So as you can see, not much has changed from the last time we talked about digital hygiene. This underscore demo folder is my folder for this class. Yours is probably labeled Digital Design Lab or something similar, and within it you should have all your files from your postcard project. So what we're going to do is create a new folder and label it something along the lines of LA Contrast Postcards. Follow whatever system you feel comfortable with. Then after that, we will create another folder, and this one will label in the same system, but for LA Contrast Book instead. Next, we can really easily drag and drop all of our files from the postcard project and drag them into the postcard folder. Now, even though it's incredibly important to always stay organized, it is especially important when you are working on a project like a book because InDesign is especially sensitive to misplaced files. When you complete your project and go print, you will have to package your file, and staying organized will really help simplify that process and will save you a lot of headaches in the long run. So just like with our postcard project, we're going to create a folder in here for all of our photos and images. Depending on the project, I sometimes create a folder for all the fonts I'm using on the project as well. I usually reserve that for client projects when they give me a specific typeface to work with. So in this book folder, you will also save all of your InDesign files and any other files that relate to this project, such as scans or Illustrator files that you created stuff in for your book. Okay, so now we're going to enter InDesign. If you've never used it before, its icon is a dark red square with a pink ID. When you open it up, you should be greeted with something that looks something like this. So I know that Shelly is going to give you a little book template to start with your book project, but I'm going to walk you through creating a new file so you have that skill for future projects. We're going to go directly into Create New. If you have turned off your welcome screen, which is this screen right now, you can also hit Command-N to create a new file. This window should look pretty familiar since it's practically the same as the new file windows in both Photoshop and Illustrator. Just like last time, we will go through all of these sections one by one so you know what to do for all of them. First, we're going to adjust our units to inches. We'll talk more about units later in this video since some functions in InDesign actually depend on these units specifically. But when you're creating a file, just choose a unit that best suits your document setup. For the width and height, you will put the measurements for one page, not the measurements for a spread. Our book will be 5.5 inches wide and 8.5 inches high. This is actually the size of half of a US letter piece of paper. We don't need to flip the orientation, so we'll leave it just like this. Next, we'll choose the amount of pages in our book. I wouldn't worry about this at all since you can always add or remove pages when you're actually working. So I'm just going to put 4 as this sort of example number. Up next, you want to make sure that you have facing pages checked. Facing pages allows you to have spreads in your books rather than individual pages. So for example, things like novels, magazines, picture books, that kind of thing will all have facing pages. However, if you are making something like a multi-page contract or a presentation deck, you would not need facing pages. After that is the start page. I'll show you a visual of how this works when we have our document created, but basically if you want to start out on a spread, you can start with like page number 2. If you want to start on a single page, you start with number 1 or like another odd number. Also, if you're collaborating with another designer on different parts of a book, you can start at a different page number for the section of your book. Since we're doing this book all by ourselves from the beginning, we're just going to start with number 1. You can just ignore primary text frame because we're not going to need it. And the next section is columns, which I prefer to adjust within the document. I think they have this option here if you already have a preferred template that you already use, and you can just stick it here before you create the document. After that, we're going to open up this margin section. For me, this section is the same as the columns where I like to adjust it in the document, but if you already have a set measurement for the margins, you can put them in here. Finally, with bleed and slug, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to put a bleed on your book documents, especially if you're going to print your books. I don't know what your guys' situation will be since you guys are doing online classes, but it's always best practice to do so do it. And finally, you won't need a slug for this project, but if you were going to a print vendor, you would use the slug to tell the vendor things like maybe the specific inks you want to use in the book or like what kind of paper you want to use. But that's about it for setting up a new document. So we're just going to hit create and create our little book. Now we've got our little book made, and you can see this is a single page that is 5.5 by 8.5 per our settings. When we scroll, you can see that it is a book with spreads or facing pages like we checked before. I believe that rulers are also automatically open, so that's always a good and helpful thing for everyone. So, like what I said before, humans are fallible and we often change our minds as we work, but that's totally okay because we can always just adjust our settings. So let's go to File, Document Setup, which will open up a window that is basically the new file window but rearranged. Go ahead and hit Preview so you can see all the changes that you make. So for example, if you realize that you wanted your page to be slightly bigger, you could go here and put in a bigger number. You can see that it automatically enlarges all of the pages. I'm just going to change it back for this example. If you need more pages, you can also add more here. And this is the starting pages that we discussed before. So I'm just going to plug in 2 instead of 1 and hit OK. So now you can see that we actually start on a spread instead of the single page like before. But the number of pages and all the other settings stay the same. Going back to our document setup, I'm going to uncheck facing pages. So just like what we talked about before, now all of our pages are individual and not placed as spreads. I'm just going to undo twice to go back to our original settings. So next we're going to talk about something we haven't really discussed before, which is units of measurement. When we were setting up our document, we set it up in inches. Because of that, everything in our InDesign right now is being measured by inches. So for example, I'm going to right click on this ruler right here and you'll see that it gives me a bunch of options for different units. Currently inches is checked, which means we're using inches. This means that all of our units, like if we go back to our document setup window, like here, are all using inches. But inches are not the best thing to measure our designs in because an inch is actually quite large in relation to our page. Instead, in design, especially when we are using grids and type, we want to use either points or picas. Note that if you're doing digital work like web or motion, you might be using pixels instead. So a point is 1/72 of an inch and is also the unit we measure type with. By making your units points, you make everything proportional to your type size, allowing for more accuracy and precision. A pica is approximately 1/6 of an inch and contains 12 points. Picas and points are essentially the same, but picas can be better for larger measurements since they compile the points. You can really use either, it doesn't really matter, but both of those options are better than using inches for your books. So now if we go back and right click again, we can select points. Make sure you adjust both the top and the left side for both horizontal and vertical units. When we go back to our document setup, you'll see that all of our units have been turned into points instead of inches. You will also see that now we get a lot more whole numbers rather than crazy decimals that come with the inches. Next, we're going to discuss some InDesign settings that I personally use, most of them that I learned from when I was in this class. I think that they really help the usability of the software, but also this might help remind you guys that all of the software is super customizable and that it's always recommended for you guys to get comfortable with making the software as functional as possible for yourself. So we're going to go to the very top left and click InDesign and then Preferences. And if you didn't know, most softwares actually have this option, so you can change the preferences by finding it under the name of the software and clicking Preferences. So in reality, there's a lot of things in here that you can change and some stuff that I can't remember if I have changed or not. But if you see something that I didn't mention and you see it's different than your own settings, just know that you have no obligation to match me. These are all recommendations and not requirements. And for sure, you can test these things out and see what way you prefer it before you actually make the change. So the next thing is turning off Greeking here in display performance. We talked a little bit about Greeking in the Illustrator tutorials, but basically Greeking is replacing real words with some sort of filler. In this case, InDesign automatically replaces the text with gray boxes when you zoom out enough in order to save on CPU. I find this incredibly annoying, so I always turn it off. So basically all you have to do is put 0 points next to where it says Greek type below. Again, if you don't find Greeking really annoying, you can leave it on, whatever you prefer. The next thing is the appearance of black. So I have it as display all blacks as rich black. Yours might be the same on default, I can't really remember, but this needs to be mentioned just because it will come up and haunt you later, perhaps. This is actually pretty important, so I hope you actually remember this, but basically 100K black and rich black are two different blacks. 100K, like its name, is just 0 of the CMY values and 100K. Rich black, on the other hand, is a mix of the CMY and K at different values to get the darkest possible black with the CMYK inks. The reason why this is so important is because when you actually do print, 100K black will look gray next to rich blacks. If you are using blacks, you want to make sure that you are being consistent. When I did my image series book, I had a bunch of photos with rich black backgrounds, but I didn't know the difference, so I just made my pages the default black in InDesign, and when I printed it out, you could actually see the difference, like you could see the border of the photograph on my black page, and it was very, very annoying, and I had to reprint a bunch of times, so I really hope you don't go through the same thing. So moving on, this is kind of a small thing, but you do want to make sure you have typographer's quotes checked. This is because quotation marks you use for like foot and inch is different than when you are quoting something. This is one of those things that just bugs graphic designers and typographers, so make sure you have this checked. Additionally, there's a bunch of other things you can change in here. For example, you can change the color of the interface. Technically, I think lighter colors are better for your eyes or something. I'm emo, so I have this dark gray background. But there's a bunch of things in here, and I would recommend you just scroll through them, take a look, see what you can do. Don't mess with too many things and screw up your InDesign, but just have fun with it. Okay, so one last thing for this part of the lesson with setup, because InDesign files easily get really big and can slow down your computer, so there's a way you can adjust the settings to help with that. So we're going to go to View and then Display Performance. Here there are 3 different settings. So to explain this a little better, I just created some type and made a circle. The key commands are the same as in Illustrator, so I'm not going to go over them. But now when I turn on fast display, you see that the detail has gone down considerably. Typical makes it a little sharper and high quality is fully rendered. I usually use high quality all of the time and just deal with my fan going off continuously. But especially if you're making something with a lot of high quality photos, the fast display is really good. It will actually replace all the photos with gray boxes and greek out some of the smaller type to really speed up your load time. But also, if you ever run into your file looking like that after hitting some random buttons, you might have just accidentally turned on fast display, so you don't need to worry. Okay, so that's it for this first part of this first lesson. Go ahead and click onto the second video, and I'll meet you guys over there.